Hello and welcome to CANNAMAntv. My name is Connor McLeod. In this interview, I speak with the first full-time CEO of the Cannabis Industry Council, Mike Morgan-Giles. In this interview, we discuss Mike's background and his position as the first full-time CEO of the Cannabis Industry Council, the current condition of the UK cannabis landscape, Cannabis Industry Council subgroups, CBD and Novel Foods, Hemp and governmental and regulatory barriers, and what to expect from the Cannabis Industry Council in 2023. Make sure and like and subscribe, and join me on Patreon, where you can help to build a stronger cannabis media platform for £3 a month. Now then, let's talk cannabis. Thank you so much for coming onto the channel. Before we get into the nitty-gritty stuff, so could you give a wee background on yourself and what led you to become essentially the first CEO of the CIC?
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, thanks for having me today. I suppose my interest in drug policy goes back to, this is going back to 2006 now when I was at university. I did my dissertation on drug policy reform. So that was more from a political, social, economic perspective, because that was my degree rather than scientific or health related. And so I took a quite big interest then, but my career hasn't really been involved with drug policy or cannabis at all since then. I worked in marketing, PR and public affairs primarily for about 15 years since then. So that's been in other sectors like water, energy, local government, and I worked for an MP for a while as well. And I also had 3 years abroad as a journalist working in Ukraine, actually, which was a interesting experience. Yeah. But yeah, this opportunity arose, and I obviously I looked into it, and speaking to Mike and seeing what the plans were for the industry and the organisation looked like a really great opportunity. So that was kind of why I applied for it a year or so ago, and yeah, it's great to be part of it now. But yeah, fairly eclectic mix before joining the CIC.
Yeah, quite right. And it's really, like I say before, the CIC is so innovative and so necessary at this time. And the ideas behind creating these subgroups was phenomenal, because let's be honest, the basis of cannabis is so diverse. It doesn't, anybody that's new to it will think that it's just this one plant, and it's just so much more. It really is medicine, it's recreation, it's science, it's really questioning the scientific method, quite honestly, because of the way that the plant is. You actually produced an article recently, the value of using real world evidence in medical cannabis, the value it's based on obviously the drug science approach, the value of real world evidence, the case for medical cannabis, where you talk about that exactly, and you've got a quote in it where you say applying the pharmaceutical approach to the whole plant medicine is akin to putting a round peg in a square hole, which is true. I mean, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So the report was done by a sort of a range of experts, I think largely with ties to drug science, but we worked with them to create a sort of an overview of what the about real world evidence and why it's an important part of the debate. And certainly it's something a lot of our members are fully supportive of. I mean, it's obviously, as you'll know, really difficult to set up clinical trials, really expensive, and sometimes it's a bit chicken and egg as to how you can do it, because you need to have certain things to set the trial up, but really to have those things you need to have other things in place, and you can end up going around in the circle a bit, so it's really difficult to get that evidence that all the regulators say they want, and obviously they're coming at it from applying the same rules that they've used elsewhere in pharmaceuticals. But obviously it's a bit nuanced with cannabis, so this is why we support T21, the Project by Drug Science, looking at a really tailored approach to individuals and how they've progressed on their journey using medical cannabis and what's happened to them. And drug science can talk a bit about the findings rather than me, but for what I've seen, there's been some really important strides there. So for us, it's really important that that is part of the debate. We want to talk to the regulators more and say, please, have more regard to real world evidence. It is really important. It is part of the picture, and we hope, that's just one tactic, one approach we can use to sort of start widening out access and start, talking to regulators about why they should be thinking about, evolving their approach.
So when you're engaged with dialogue with regulators and government officials and stuff, what's your experience? What is it like interpersonally when you're engaged with dialogue about cannabis?
Yeah, well, it's a challenge in the cannabis market, because there are really sort of probably 5 or 6 regulators, really. So I mean, we can talk about CBD, and there's the Food Standards Agency, and then there's also MHRA and the CQC, and then you have the Advisory Council for Misuse of Drugs, and then you've got various government departments involved. So there's the Environment one, there's the Home Office dealing with the licensing, there's obviously the health angle to it, and then you can also get into things like justice, and you can get into the treasury in terms of all kinds of other elements too. So it's a really complicated mix, and other countries will just have an office for cannabis or whatever it's called, and there's one place. So we have to work quite hard at targeting all of the regulators, trying to speak to all of them. So we did have the FSA speaking at our all-member event recently around their approach to novel foods, and obviously there's challenges and concerns with the direction of travel, and obviously we're doing our best to try and influence and inform around that. But yeah, we're speaking to others as well. So speaking to NHS England, trying to speak to MHRA, etc., as to what their elements in it too.
What is it like regarding novel foods? I mean, I was going to ask that because obviously I don't know if this is year 2 now that we're into novel foods, and it was just such a, at the time it seemed almost apocalyptic for the individuals involved, and unfortunately since then there's been a lot of individuals who have not made the correct application process and not been able to match the finances required, so they've inevitably fell away. And these were the same individuals essentially that propped up the CBD industry initially. So I mean, what stage is it at currently?
Yeah, well, let's take a look at the data a couple of days ago, actually. So, I mean, I think there's been around 12,000 applications for products, and I think as of about in the last week or so, there has been a few hundred rejected. I think the challenge is to try and understand why those decisions were taken. Obviously the website doesn't clarify that, and for our point of view, we're going to try and speak to some of those affected to try and understand, was this ticking the wrong box in a form, or is it something more fundamental than that? And I think until we get that information, until we understand that it's hard to say. But there's clearly still a lot more, well, into the thousands that that no decision has been taken yet. So I mean, that's obviously really important as well, to try and understand about how many of those are going to be taken to the next stage, and how many of those may face the same challenges as those have in the last week.
Yeah, it's really because let's say a couple of years ago, maybe I think it was maybe last year, I had Robert Jappy on the channel, and he was talking about the basis behind novel foods, and it didn't seem positive. It seemed more, whether the reality is we do need a regulatory element, obviously. You've got cowboys, you've got insufficient products, you've got the possibility of there being intoxicants to an extent, essentially. Yeah, it did pop into my mind earlier today that I was like, 'cause I've really no idea. I've not really looked into cannabis. Is so diverse. When you look in one element of it, you inevitably miss out on information from the other side. So I just kind of wondered, like, what is the CBD landscape like at the moment?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think obviously some businesses are concerned, as with any industry, if the regulations are shifting and you don't quite know where they're going to land, that's very difficult to develop a business plan, or to know, just to have confidence that in the direction of the industry. So I mean, for us, I mean, this is a growing market. It's producing tax revenue. It's from a wellness perspective, people are providing positive feedback as to their experiences. So we think it's a really important part of the landscape, and certainly we want to try and push that forward. But yeah, until we see where this review finishes up, it's obviously difficult to be certain. So it's something that we're trying to speak to regulators and others about, as to what we can do to try and improve this.
Yeah. Wellness it was good that you mentioned wellness there, because very often it's like the basis of cannabis consumption, because it's obviously therapeutic, regardless of its element of consumption. Whether it's explicitly medicinal or individuals just relaxing it in the house, they all seem to come under the category of wellness. And it was like, I can't remember who it was I was speaking to. It might have been Professor Roger Penrose, potentially, where he was talking about how cannabinoids may fit into a category of similar to vitamins and minerals, because of the fact that it's so complementary to the endocannabinoid system in any form of consumption. Obviously, you could take away the unfortunately, let's call it the narcotic effect, and consume cannabis that has no psychoactive effects, and it still has the same impact in a therapeutic perspective as you would if you're taking it medicinally. So I could see why people it's so dizzying to individuals that are unfamiliar with the plant.
Yeah, and I mean, with CBD products, there's two different regulatory regimes as well. We've obviously just been talking about it as a food or food supplement, and that's what the FSA oversees. And then obviously there are some products that are available, from a medical perspective, that are overseen by a completely different regime. there are obviously CBD products that the NHS will prescribe. So there are the two distinct regimes. So that's obviously, important to clarify. So I mean, yeah, in terms of the public, I mean, from what I've seen in some surveys, there's certainly a willingness around a large group of people actually to consider CBD as an option for them. So the opportunities are there. So it's important that we defend this market.
Yeah, certainly, and that's the thing you mentioned. The obviously the distinction between the medicinal and the food element. There's I think I don't know, was it you guys that had instigated the most recent, or at least pushed the most recent NHS trial that's focusing on the evidence, the real world evidence?
So what we're looking at the moment is we want to build up a health economics case for cannabis prescriptions. So we're talking about the medical side of things here. So we're working with Drug Science and University of York. They've got a health economics sort of consortium that they own, and we've pretty much launched that project now. So that the work has begun, and what that hopes to do is to look at it's looking at what the economic case is from increased cannabis prescriptions in terms of how they can improve people who have chronic pain. Mm-hmm. So it's saying, well, what if rather than spending money in the way it's being done now, so that might be on an opioid, it might be on forms of therapy, it might be on other treatments that cost money and have other impacts, and also looking at some of the other unknowns. I mean, some of the other treatments might lead to potential addiction, for example, and other concerning issues. So if all of that was replaced by cannabis prescriptions, what would that actually mean for the NHS, but also what would it mean more generally to the health economy? And obviously we believe that it would be at least cost neutral, if not cost positive, but it's clearly up to the research to determine that. But that's what we're confident will arise, because as you know, there's so much potential here, and a cannabis prescription is really a far better option for public health than people being put on opiates, for example, which we know from seeing what happens in the US and other parts of the UK, that the potential damage that can do to communities.
Yeah, which is extreme damage. Let's be honest, really extreme damage. And the thing is, one of the things I found quite interesting was the method of the analysis. So there was a thing where it was like, you referred to it in the article, it was like the key NHS cannabis project developing a flexible health economics analysis tool to evaluate the potential of cannabis prescriptions. So I mean, that flexible health economics analysis tool seems challenging.
Yeah, so this is why we've got independent researchers doing it. So they're going to build a model, and it will involve taking lots of data points and creating a model that will then inform, well, if X is happening at the moment and it causes Y, what happens if cannabis is used? And it will be sort of a flexible model, so the numbers can be changed depending on what information we can get, and then that will produce an output which will say what the result is. So I mean, I can't say exactly how it's going to look yet, because we've really only just announced this project, and it's really beyond my A grade to develop statistical models, but that's what they're trying to do.
It's very exciting. I mean, is there a timeline on when the information should be arriving?
Yeah, first half of the year, it should be finalised and out in public domain. That's our ambition, and it's an important tool. It's not a silver bullet or anything like that. But what we hope is we can then have those dialogues with the regulators and say, you were potentially concerned about the cost and other impacts of potentially increased number of prescriptions. Well, actually, we found that shouldn't be a concern anymore. That doesn't mean that things will change overnight, but it does mean that hopefully is one thing that we can talk to them about and hopefully move them forward.
Yeah, it does seem, I mean, like anything when it comes to cannabis, it's all transitional, slow and steady wins the race, it appears to be. Yeah, I mean, let's say the Cannabis Industry Council is phenomenal for the diversity of its subgroups. I mean, it's when he's begun, I think there were 6, now you have 8. And what could you say anything about the subgroups that's going on at the moment?
Yeah, so we've got a wide range. We've got our plant science working group, which I know you mentioned. You spoke to Gary Yates recently. He's the chair of that, and they're looking at things from a sort of a biology perspective. Although the group's open to anybody and everybody from the membership, so they're looking at that element of it. We have a prescription cannabis working group, which is obviously interested in what we've just spoken about to do with this research, but also things around, well, should GPs be allowed to prescribe medical cannabis, for example, because at the moment it's just consultants that can do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the type of issue they're looking at too. We have a standards working group, which is just about to produce actually a really useful output, which should be online pretty soon, a sort of A to Z of cannabis. So working through over 100 terms and their definitions. So the idea behind that is to just try and inform and educate and help everybody, be coming from the same hymn sheet, I suppose. Obviously looking at other things, for example, looking at driving, because you may well know about this, but obviously patients are allowed to have their prescription, but what does that mean in terms of them then driving a car? And it's quite complicated. There is a grey area there, and it is challenging for patients. So they're looking at issues like that too. And then we have others. We've just created a CBD working group as well, because obviously we've just spoken about novel foods and the challenges there. So we're trying to bring together those members with that knowledge and expertise and try and form some useful CIC positions and outputs in that area too. And then there are others too. We have a range. We have an ESG one looking at how companies can have a positive impact, on the environment and socially. And there's others too. So they're really important, and they're sort of member led. They determine what the meetings discuss, what the objectives are, what the outputs are. So they're really important to us.
Yeah, excellent. I noticed, I'm sure many of the viewers will be urgently waiting for me to ask this, but the adult consumption group, there's I think it's chaired by Dr. Callie Seaman. What is that? Because it's obviously scoping the adult. Is that just an analysis of what's emerging globally?
Yeah. So obviously there's a lot of different regulatory regimes worldwide, and some have developed pretty quickly, as you'll know, in the last 5 years or so. So it's looking at, for example, what's happening in Canada. Let's give an example of what's happening in Australia. So and that's looking at the good and the bad in terms of where they've got to, because as we move forward in the UK, we don't want to repeat the same mistakes that others have made elsewhere, and that doesn't mean in terms of necessarily where they finish up, but what were the specifics that they did, and how did that affect? So for example, looking at Canada, they've obviously moved quite far forward in terms of adult use, but what did that mean for the medical market? So that group will be looking at international examples to understand what do they do well and what do they not do so well, and what can the UK learn from that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I noticed that recently Cannabis Health magazine put up a brilliant article detailing Malta and the movements they're putting forward about how that they're applying I think it's through their cannabis. They have a central, unlike the Cannabis Industry Council, which is a kind of diverse subgroup element. I think the ARUC, I think, unless I'm mistaken, in Malta has it's more centralised, so it doesn't have even nearly as a diversity. But they're promoting the cannabis social clubs, and it seems to be relatively innovative because they're applying it that you can't buy or sell and through each inter-club, but the club cultivates themselves. I think that there's depending on the size of the club, I think they have 500 grams maximum based on the membership, proportionate to the membership. So I think as the membership increases, the maximum quantity you're allowed also increases. But it was just brilliant that they're prioritising the club model, because it ensures that the community incentive behind cannabis, which has been there the entire time, is maintained, because it just seems so important that the community behind particularly adult consumption is maintained instead of a relatively corporatised element, which was emerging in Canada. And I have no idea what Canada's like at the moment, but I do remember at the beginning it seemed that was the fear, that it was emerging, this corporate element, and the individual couldn't cultivate themselves.
Yeah, well, I suppose what I can say, I mean, from our perspective, patients and users are really important to us. We want, a lot of our members are involved with the supply chain, but clearly, that their customers, we want to make sure that their needs and what their expectations are, excuse me, are sort of understood, and we want to embed that into the CIC now. How that looks ultimately, I mean, some of the key things we want to do is to sort of build bridges between patients and clinics, for example, so that patients are getting the products that they need to help them, and clinics are supported to helping achieve that. But in terms of examples like Malta that you mentioned, that group may well look at other models like that, but I don't have a particular view on that. For us, it's more around supporting patients and looking at the medical side of it, the wellness side, and obviously looking at hemp, which we can come on to as well, and what that can do as a transformational approach to decarbonisation.
Yeah. I mean, just be talking about hemp there. I mean, is it still the current barriers of 0.2%, and farmers are still having to destroy flower tops? Is that still the situation?
Yeah, that broadly is the position. Yeah, I mean, I think it's as I understand it, we're one of, if not the biggest exporter of cannabis in the world, which I think is probably little known in the UK. But then in terms of our own market, I think the majority of it is imported. So that's quite an unusual place to be in. It's clearly not very efficient economically. There's clearly going to be additional costs from that. Obviously, it doesn't make that much sense if you are a farmer, clearly, because you are growing something and then you're having to destroy a valuable part of your plant. So that obviously doesn't make a lot of sense, really. But that is where we are. I mean, the Home Office oversees the licensing regime for hemp. I mean, we would like to see DEFRA, the Environment Department, take that over. We think that'd be pragmatic. Hemp offers so many opportunities for sectors like construction, energy, as well as obviously the farming side of things. And it's far better that that's led from an environmental business perspective rather than a Home Office perspective, which is obviously looking at a much different issue.
Again, dialogue wise with the Home Office, what stage is it at regarding hemp? Because I think a couple of years ago, you guys produced the 10 recommendations for government, and within those recommendations, there was like promoting raising the minimum THC level to 1%, I think, because then that would ensure any form of climatic factors or variation between crops, so that nobody essentially was prosecuted based in those exact climatic factors or anything else. So, what's it like when you're engaging with the relevant authorities regarding hemp?
Yes, I mean we have spoken to DEFRA in the past few months, and they made positive noises around hemp and the opportunities it can bring. And my understanding is they're looking to, I think they've commissioned some independent research into it, and I hope that'll it's obviously down to them, but hopefully that'll get published soon. So we'll obviously wait for that, and we are speaking to them, but. Yeah, we do need to try and move this forward. We do need really a regime which makes sense, which enables that to be used. I mean, we see so many opportunities. I mean, if picking the construction example, it's obviously quite an energy intensive, carbon heavy sector for obvious reasons. If people could start using hempcrete and hemp flooring and insulation and all other kinds of product that can come from the plant, we could see carbon emissions drop substantially. And it's really trying to talk about it in that framework. So there's a lot of work to do just to try and bring on environmental groups and construction groups and the wide. Hopefully we can bring that to government and others and say, this is a big opportunity here. This has nothing to do with drug policy, really. This is to do with what the amazing opportunities from a plant that can really help decarbonize. So there's a bit of work to do there, but we think that's achievable, and we're going to push hard in that area.
Excellent. Because let's say individuals that are unaware of cannabis generally, the moment you start telling them about hemp and the beneficial aspects that hemp has, not only in the environment, but as you mentioned, the construction industrial element, it's unrivaled by any other material.
Yeah, I mean, there's said to be about 10,000 different products you can make from it, and it is remarkable, really. I mean, I visited one of our members a few months ago, and just he showed me their sort of hemp straw, and it was just remarkably sort of resilient and tough, and I hadn't really appreciated it until you have your hands on it, and you
Yeah.
sort of try to pull it apart, and you really understand, what the potential is there. There's just so many incredible uses. So, we're really trying to work hard with our partners like the British Hemp Alliance and the Cannabis Trade Association to see, how we can progress in this area, because it is remarkable. It's obviously been around for centuries as well. People have used it in so many different ways. I think it's been used in things like shipbuilding as well. It's just it has so many opportunities that we need to realise.
Yeah, the entire British Empire was built on the back of hemp, let's be honest. It's the same thing as well. Like, it's up in Scotland here, it's like, the Scottish Hemp Association is doing phenomenal work. There's much more farmers who are not well versed in cannabis whatsoever, embracing the crop itself, because they're seeing from a farming perspective the benefits it has and the resiliency towards it. I mean, you've got they'll have like crops nearby which will be obviously unrelated to hemp in any way, shape, or form, that will be like not as effective, not as efficient, not producing the same relative yield, and it just seems to be. I mean, the response. I mean, I think there was a program Kyle One was on BBC maybe at the end of last year, and they were talking about that exact thing, where it was like the individual was surprised that it's like, I can't believe hemp. So the farmer, he was like, oh, it's a brilliant crop, it's surviving, and I'm pretty certain they were on the water. I could be wrong. But and he's had other crops in the past who have failed, but hemp is just moving forward, and I think a lot of people are unaware of how resilient and positively impactful that hemp would be if it was embraced much more.
Yeah, I think absolutely, and we work with Kyle as well, and I did see that clip on BBC, so it's really positive to see that. But yeah, there's so much education to do. There is still a bit of a stigma. People, well, not everybody, but some people immediately jump back to the debate around drug policy, when this really is just to do with the plant and what it can do. And it is going to take some time to break down those barriers with some people. It shouldn't be like that, but that's just the reality of where we are. So there is that big public engagement piece, political engagement piece that we've got to do. We've got to talk to other sectors. It's much more valuable rather than me or somebody like me saying, isn't cannabis fantastic? It'd be much better if the farming community could come out directly and say that, or those who are building houses could come out and directly say that. That's where we can start to really build the credibility that it deserves. So that's a piece of work we've got to do.
Fully agree. And one of the things that popped to mind there actually was the white coat mafia, let's call them that, where it's like the reality is you need individuals who have credentials, who out with the range of just consumption of cannabis, to back the plant, because then individuals are more likely to listen. Because let's be honest, one of the things I think as well that makes hemp so controversial in the eyes of individuals who are uneducated relating to cannabis is the symbol of the leaf. It's so provocative to so many people, and yet it symbolizes nothing but positivity in the regards of the environment and consumption. And I was talking to somebody the other day about this, and they were saying about how, cannabis causes brain damage, it's brain damage. And obviously it's a rhetoric that they've picked up somewhere without investigating it at all, because that's not the case whatsoever. And I just made a point to say, and I was like, no, the negative aspect you're looking at, if any, is a small portion of the population will be sensitive to cannabis, and you'll also have a small portion of the population that will abuse cannabis, who are not sensitive to it, but because of their abuse will have a negative impact. And I was like, relating to the small portion of the population who are sensitive to it, I was like, it makes no sense to prohibit an entire plant who has such a diverse range of positive benefits under the basis of a small portion of I was like, it's akin essentially to saying you should ban all movies that have flashing images because a small portion of the population have epilepsy. You wouldn't. What you do is you put in a safety measure that prevents the individual sensitive to it from being harmed. And yet this seems to be a liberty that's not really extended to cannabis. And that's where organizations such as the CIC, professional groups that are related to cannabis who are investigating it, they really are boosting the benefits of the plant, in a positive way publicly.
Yeah, and I think that there has been some scaremongering. I think there was, I'm not sure of the chap's name, but there was a report that came out of Australia that I think some police and crime commissioners in the UK jumped on and started advocating. It was basically extremely critical of cannabis and talking about some of the misinformed side effects, which weren't actually really the case at all. And that has been used by some of these police and crime commissioners to try and justify really hardline policies. And actually, not that report was actually debunked not too long later. But the problem is that some of these public figures haven't corrected course. They're still advocating these misconceived views. So, and that is a problem for the public debate and public policy.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I think that's one of the things as well. Let's be honest, cannabis obviously has negative impacts. If you drink too much water, it has negative impacts, but it shouldn't be labelled as that exclusively. Again, the conversation I had with an individual the other day was exactly that. Look, the negatives you see from own experience. I was speaking from own experience, quite honestly. I was like, when you consume too much cannabis on a long-term basis, in heightened emotional situations, it'll have a negative an impact emotionally, and it's largely related to the very high number of cannabinoid receptors present in your limbic system. And your limbic system obviously regulates your emotional well-being. So I think these things, but again, a short period of time later, a tolerance break over the course of 72 hours will completely neutralize that, because it allows the receptors to re-establish themselves. And again, this is science which is out with the grasp of the general public. So inevitably, they're going to have a very narrow perspective on what cannabis truly offers us.
Yeah, but on the other hand, though, the public is actually pretty favourable towards cannabis. So there was some research done by YouGov last year, which I think found around 42% of people were in favour of more liberal rules for cannabis, and only about 20% were in favour of tougher, and the rest were undecided or didn't know. But what that showed is actually that, you know, the rules we have now are actually out of step with what the public actually wants. So, you know, that's something a message we hope we can hammer home, because actually it's not only just you know, right from a medical perspective and an environmental perspective and an economic perspective, but actually politically, this is where people are. It's not actually you know, it shouldn't be a taboo, and it shouldn't be something to be concerned by what the public might think, when actually they're you know, they want a more liberal approach.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what makes it so brilliant that the CIC, again, has such a diverse range of professionals, because it really boosters that discussion. It boosters the dialogue between the public and individuals who are informed. And I think that bridge continuously needs to be reduced to the point where these conversations in the future, I think that's what will be interesting to figure out, to see what it'll be like in 20 years' time, you know, the general approach, where whether or not the legitimacy of how informed everybody was will be regarded as, oh, it wasn't that bad. Whereas the reality is, this is a real uphill battle that we've got ahead of us.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take some time. I mean, I think if you look at the politics of it, obviously the current government, you know, has up to 2 years left before they've got to call an election, and obviously, you know, looking at the opinion polls, they're in difficulty, and you know, we're obviously not in good shape in terms of you know, the economy, and in terms of you know, the challenges the NHS faces, and obviously there's ongoing strikes. So clearly their focus is going to be very much on those sort of, you know, day-to-day, you know, key issues. You can understand why they're looking at those. So I don't think it's going to be difficult to make a lot of headway in the next, you know, before the next election. And then you look at the next election, and it'd be difficult I think it'd be difficult to envisage either major party going into that election prioritising drug law reform. I mean, I'd obviously be delighted to be proven wrong, but I suppose for the opposition, having been out of power for a long time, they're going to they may well view it as I mean, I don't see it this way, but they may well view it as a slightly risky proposition to have anything in there, so they may well not. So, you know, then you start looking even further ahead. So it could take a few years, you know, which I know is not what everybody wants to hear, but we just got to keep chipping away and keep making the arguments, and you know, I think we'll make progress.
Yeah, I always say that thing about work is, like, you keep chipping at a tree and it'll eventually fall down. And I really hope that's the same for cannabis, because it's really you know, it's needed. Internationally speaking, though, the CIC is really making some movements. So you guys are you are supporting the CT Can 2023, is that right?
Yeah, we're supporting a few different events, and that's obviously one that's coming up in a couple of weeks. So we're pleased to be supporting that. I think our colleagues at MCCS are also supporting that too. So yeah, if we obviously encourage people to go along to that, I think it should be a useful event. But yeah, we're trying to build out our events presence as well. So we'll be at a few different events this year, or you know, either in person or supporting, you know, as a sort of media partner. So we'll be at Cannabis Europa, for example, as well, which we're looking forward to, and also looking to run our own conference later in the year as well. So we're sort of discussing how that can look as well. So yeah, we that's an important way to, you know, to have debates about policy, to bring people together, to have that networking. And yeah, if we can build ties, to go back to your point, if we can build ties internationally, that's great. We want to work with our colleagues in countries like Australia and the US and Canada and New Zealand, and share good practice and examples and knowledge. Work through other bodies, whether it's European ones or more international ones, because a lot of the challenges and issues are obviously the same. I mean, certainly from a scientific and horticultural perspective, there's no real difference there. It's really about the differences come in terms of where the public is in each country and where the rules are, but the principles, the challenges, overriding ones are the same.
Yeah. I interviewed the National Cannabis Industry Association in the United States, and they were describing, the individual was extremely knowledgeable about what was going on, and to the point where I felt like my death, quite honestly. It was really but he was describing the same thing, and particularly the confusion around the newly emerging like Delta 8s and these kind of things, and how they weren't contained within the same legislation. Therefore, there was synthetic production and all these negative impacts, and it just seemed to be so apparent that almost like a one size fits all legislation of let's move forward through a wellness perspective seemed to be the safest direction, because let's say I would say relatively infrequently, but frequently enough, that individuals are being, particularly children, are being harmed as a consequence of synthetically created cannabinoids. And there was an individual, I think it was like a wee 4-year-old boy, and there was like a jelly sweetie that his mummy had, and consumed it, and I think it was related to also other physiological factors, but it was because it was a synthetic cannabinoid. It's unstable, and it doesn't. It's again, these are all negative impacts associated with prohibition. That's essentially what's going on here, and I think a greater dialogue is necessary. But what you said there is accurate. It's globally, we're all facing the same challenges relating to cannabis.
Yeah, and that's right. And if internationally, people can be brought together and have those discussions and try and figure out how we can support each other. I mean, so it's not always that straightforward though. So, for example, some of the regulators in the UK will take a view on clinical trials and research, where if it's not done in exactly the right UK structure, then it won't be something they consider. So there is a challenge that even if some really fantastic research is done elsewhere, but it hasn't been done in the way that the regulators want here, we can't even necessarily use that. So sometimes it's not quite as straightforward, but if we can find ways where we can share that knowledge, and we can hopefully not mean we're all repeating each other's work elsewhere, that's great. And I think we want to be part of those conversations.
So since you started in August, what have you seen change the most inside of the organization?
Yeah, so we were founded in April 21, so we're coming up to our 2-year anniversary, and some fantastic work was done by Professor Mike Barnes and a couple of my colleagues in setting it up. And yeah, I was the first sort of full-time employee brought in back in August. So since then, in terms internally, what have we done? So we've introduced a vision and mission for the organisation and some values, just to give it an underpinning of why are we here, what are we trying to do, and I think that's helped focus. So in terms of the broader vision, it's around increasing access to the plants so that that can bring about a wide range of sort of medical, environmental, and economic benefits. And then it's about how can we get there. So that's one bit of work. We've introduced some strategic priorities to help give ourselves a bit of focus, and now we've got 2 or 3 of those now that we really want to talk about this year. One of which you and I have spoken about, to do with hemp in the built environment. The other one that we may well have some plans on is to do with GPs prescribing, where we're really looking at how can we try and push that agenda ahead, because we think that's really important. Again, it won't be a silver bullet, because just even if that was to come to pass, if GPs were allowed to prescribe, it doesn't mean that they're all suddenly going to do so. They need to have the right training. They need to believe in the viability of that as a medical alternative. So that's something that we want to focus on this year. And then we've just looked at just professionalizing our working groups, helping give them a bit more of a structure. We've done other things, like we've broadened out our code of conduct to make the organisation more inclusive, and that's really important for us as well. And also just trying to create an internal discussion forum for patients and patient groups, something we're working on too, because we have a few of them in membership, and their insights are really valuable. So we're looking at how can we bring them together, and how can we talk about all the issues patients face. There's so many different issues, but cannabis can do a lot for these people. So it's about opening up those discussions. So again, that's another thing that's important to us. And I suppose finally we changed the fee structure last year, so we made it more progressive. It was a flat fee for membership, and now it's progressive. So we hope that will enable companies to join, more companies to join. We've seen a good number in the last month or so, which is really positive. And then building out the benefits as well. So I mentioned the annual conference. We want to also offer more sort of PR opportunities for members, and we want to also offer them more opportunities to sort of share knowledge as well, whether that's through webinars or publications or whatever. So it can work that way too. So being a member actually really helps them grow their business and collaborate in that way.
Mm-hmm. Day to day, what are the daily challenges that you face personally?
Well, we're a really small team, so sort of got to do a lot of different things. Some of it is just the admin and running the business, which do my colleagues, and then we obviously have the reasons why we're here, which is to try and enact change and try and help improve this industry. So yeah, obviously one thing that's come up in the past week or so is, as we talked about, the FSA novel food developments. We obviously want to I go to all the working groups, so the prescription cannabis working group is looking at the GP prescribing issue as well, and that's something that we're developing a plan on, and also just working with colleagues on a sort of looking at the built environment as well. Going back to what we talked about, coming up with a policy paper around that, and what cannabis can do, what hemp can do to really decarbonize that industry. So it's the admin of the organisation, as well as really trying to deliver change and deliver tangible outputs. The reason why we're here.
Mm-hmm. That's really exciting. And the thing is, I think Dr. Gary Yates had mentioned that you're working on a paper that's focusing on I'm totally butchering his words here, but essentially focusing on the biology of the plant, which could then impact policy, opposed to policy impacting studying the biology. Is that right?
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. I mean, the biology side, I must admit, I probably leave to Gary, but yeah, it's really important bit of work they're doing, and it's the more outputs that they can do to help educate and inform the better.
Yeah. Personally, what do you think is the most fascinating part of your job? What really draws you to cannabis?
I suppose a couple of things in terms of the plant itself. It's obviously really highly regulated, which means that there are so many different challenges that we've got to address. That while at times that can feel very difficult when there are sort of 10 or 15 different problems you're trying to solve, it does mean that there's it's really wide variety of topics to discuss. That we've obviously spoken about some of them. And that's an interesting area, rather than moving into a space where the rules are broadly as you want, and you're just trying to keep things ticking over. So there's that really big challenge that I really want to do my small part to try and influence and change. And then I suppose that the role itself as well, there's a lot of different elements to my role, especially because we've got the small team. So that's great. It means no 2 days are the same, really, in terms of both the policy side and the actual work. So but I'm very passionate about change. I really believe in the plant, and as I mentioned, I've had an interest in this kind of area for a long time. So my commitment's certainly there, and that's really important to me as well.
You briefly touched on it already, but the year ahead, what are you really hoping to achieve by, just say, this time next year?
Well, we'll have this health economics case by the middle of this year, and then obviously the challenge from there is to get it published, and then actually put it in front of the right stakeholders and try and push that. And if we can do that alongside efforts to try and allow GPs to prescribe, we hope that will help move the debate on, primarily within the NHS, but also more broadly as well. And we'll see where that leads. But that's really important, that widening access and availability, and just helping the patients in that regard. And then with hemp as well, I think we need to start speaking to stakeholders outside the sector. And I think if we can have a report in place to provide to them and to talk to them about, in practical terms, why hemp offers so many opportunities. That we hope will open some doors, and we'll start, having change in that area. But it is going to take time. We're fully aware that things aren't going to happen overnight, regardless of whether people would like them to. We've just got to keep pushing.
Yeah, I think it's just to even have, let's say, a central cannabis authority in the UK is just it's a relief, quite honestly. I mean, I've been engaged with cannabis essentially since I was about 14, and the difference between then and now is just, let's say, I'm just relieved that we have this thing, we have this organisational body with professionals that are present, working towards this for the benefits of the plant. Because without it, I mean, and that in itself is actually really, on the outside of anybody looking in, they think that there's no movement in the UK, but that's a really innovative thing that many countries, more countries than not, don't have a centralised organisation for this.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously not stragglers in terms of every single country in the world. There are some areas where we have made some progress, but yeah, there's still a lot more to do. And if there was a one centralized point of place to go to, that would certainly help move things forward, because obviously at the moment, if it's spread across 5 or 6 different departments and arm's length bodies in government, they're all going to stick to their own remit, and they may or may not be having active discussions with each other as to how everything becomes a really integrated approach. And I'm not saying they're not. I don't want to go against what they may be doing, but there isn't clearly that obligation and that working in close proximity to help really form a coherent approach across government, which is what we want to see.
Yeah, a unified approach. I mean, again, Gary Yates, he'd mentioned that it's not really the individual departments which are difficult to get through, because you have one department that's saying, right, yeah, that's fine if you do this, this, and this, then you'll be fine. And then you go to another department, they go, right, okay, this will be fine if you do this, this, and this, you'll be fine. But it's the little red tape in between that dialogue, the red tape between the departments, it seems to be the challenge.
Yeah, and there have been, one bit, I suppose, good news was the MHRA recently put out some guidance, some clarifications on what the process is in terms of manufacturing products, and that was not only looking at what the MHRA does, it was also looking at what the Home Office does, because I think before there wasn't a clarity exactly the order of how businesses should go about things to work through that process of authorization. And sometimes, they weren't clear. Should they go to the Home Office first? Should they go to the MHRA first? Sometimes it appeared you'd have to go to one, but then the other would say the same thing. So it was a bit chicken and egg. So they have actually put out a process now it has quite a clear flow chart. It's available on the MHRA website. And the industry has said, that it's positive that you've made that step. You are actually trying to stabilize the business environment by telling us what we need to do. There's no particular policy change as far as I understand it. I mean, those who may well have been in the know, having worked through it, might have got a sense of that's how it operates. But a lot of people didn't necessarily know, and now they know. Well, okay, there may well be lots of things I've got to do, but at least I know what they are and the order that I do them in.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I was really unfamiliar with that. That's tremendous stuff then, because that's, like, medically speaking, there's always that difficulty. There's always that breakdown of what's actually going on. And yeah, as you're fully aware, the individuals, the number of individuals in the UK who consume cannabis medically is far more than was expected before studies analysing the number came around. So it's brilliant to see movement. It's still frustrating, obviously, inevitably, that people they can't get through the NHS. You have to get private prescriptions. You see individuals all the time having to crowdfund and collect money just for for medicine that, quite honestly, should be readily accessible.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously with the NHS at the moment, the law itself is quite broad. So the law itself says, people can get prescriptions for cannabis products for any condition. But the NHS, though, is uses the NICE guidelines, which in practice says you have access to 3 drugs for particular conditions, so MS, epilepsy, and improving life for those with cancer, improving their day-to-day lives. So that obviously is quite restrictive, and we know that there's only a handful of people who've got NHS prescriptions for conditions that don't that those 3 products outside of those 3 products, I should say, and we know that there's also only about 900 to 1,000 patients at all on the NHS, because we did an FOI request at the end of last year on all the NHS Foundation trusts. So we know that there's not many patients on the NHS, and most are going private. There's more like 20 to 25,000 annually going private. So there's a lot more privately, and clearly that there's an expense there, and as we know, the NHS isn't really reimbursing them. So that's a piece of work to do, which we hope the health economics project will help, and other things as well. But the NICE guidelines are being used as more of the rules, not the guidelines. So that's just the reality of where we are.
Yeah, that's extremely frustrating. I'm familiar with that, the NICE guidelines, because the thing that was most explicit, it seemed to be, personally, was that their absence of, I could have changed by now, I've no idea, I've not checked it for a while, but their absence of that containing chronic pain as a particular medical condition that cannabis can treat. And that's ridiculous, because that's the main medical condition that seems to be present.
Yeah. So I mean, for example, there's someone I know who has medical cannabis for Crohn's, and that, I mean, I'm not an expert in the condition, but it does sound pretty horrible from the impact it can have on your life, and the pain it can cause you. And I know another friend of mine has also got Crohn's, and he's looking into whether or not medical cannabis would be suitable, and I'm certainly encouraging him to take a look at it, and things like that. I mean, people have tried all kinds of treatments that have as what people tell you from their own perspective, have not had anyway as much benefit as using medical cannabis has had, in terms of making removing that horrendous pain they're facing each day. And there are obviously many other conditions as well. So yeah, we hope our economics project, our health economics project, will look at this type of thing and say, well, there's a real business economics case, as well as actually a health case for allowing this to be prescribed.
Fingers crossed. It's very exciting, Mike. Honestly, I'm really delighted to hear that. Let's say I'm pretty certain we've covered everything that I was hoping to talk about. I mean, have you got anything you'd like to add before we get going?
Nothing at this stage. I mean, I think we're really glad to be talking today. And what we want to do as an organisation is we're a big tent. So we welcome membership from anybody in the industry, and we have progressive fees. So if anyone wants to get involved with the council, then please do let me know. We're really keen to hear from you. We want to bring all voices together, which we think is really important. We're not trying to represent any one particular part of the industry. We want to represent everybody and make sure the work we do is our benefit to the industry. It's not coming at a perspective of looking to try and push forward the benefits of particular areas or particular companies. It's really about everybody and making sure we actually drive forward the industry to positive change. So I suppose that would just be my sort of final message.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mike. This has been an absolute pleasure.
No, me too. Really appreciate it. Really great to talk.
Thanks to Mike for giving me his time, and thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the content. I'll see you next time.